is BBC 5 Live, available on the BBC iPlayer radio app with Anna Foster.
Morning, it's 6 minutes past 11 on the programme. The headline on the world's oldest Jewish newspaper this week is a strong one: anti-Semitic and a racist, it says. The Jewish Chronicle is quoting the veteran Labour MP Margaret Hodge, who was referring to the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn when she made those remarks. And there's been, as you know, a large and growing row about Labour's attempts to crack down on anti-Semitism within the party, and particularly whether the rules that they've brought in are tough enough. Well, before we came on air, I spoke to the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Stephen Pollard, and asked him why he decided to take such a strong line.
There are times, when you just feel that, if you're editing a newspaper, there are moments that you need to do something that hopefully will make some kind of an impact. I think you can overplay it sometimes if you do it too often, so we try to be very cautious when we do it. But I think this week has been, for the Jewish community, has been an extraordinary week when the Labour Party basically said, not just to most of its own MPs, to 68 rabbis and to the chief rabbi, who said that if they refused to adopt the normally adopted definition of anti-Semitism, they'd be treating the Jewish community with contempt. It's been an extraordinary week because the Labour Party said, fine, we will treat you with contempt. And then what was interesting from the perspective of the editor of a Jewish newspaper is that, and I'm not blaming the BBC or ITN or Sky or so on for this, but it received almost no coverage. I think that's partly because of the Brexit shenanigans, but also I think people are sort of slightly fatigued by this story about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. But what lifted it and started to give it traction, as it were, was when Margaret Hodge confronted Jeremy Corbyn on Tuesday night in the House of Commons and called him to his face an anti-Semite and a racist. And I think that crystallised the story, not just for us, but I think for lots of people and for the media as well. And so we've taken her words and put them on a picture of beside a picture of Mr. Corbyn and written what is a relatively strong leader, but actually is nothing that we haven't been saying for quite a few years now.
So talk me through, Stephen, for people who haven't seen this new definition and maybe haven't been following this in detail, what is the issue with the code that Labour have brought in? What's missing from it? So
I'll try and keep it as sort of brief as possible. So there's an internationally accepted definition of anti-Semitism. It's put together by a body called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It's been adopted by many governments worldwide. In the UK, it's been adopted by I think over 60 councils, by the Crown Prosecution Service, by the judiciary. The police use it. It's the sort of widely accepted definition of anti-Semitism, and within it contains a number of examples of things that could be, of words that could be seen to be anti-Semitic. Now, what the Labour Party has done is it's taken the bulk of that definition, but it's deliberately left out 4 examples, and those examples all relate to Israel. Now, the left, the Corbynites are saying, the reason we've done that is because it bars all criticism of Israel, which would be ridiculous were that true. Because, take Israel itself as a society. It's a fantastically argumentative society politically, and Israelis criticise Israel the whole time. So, were that definition to bar criticism of Israel, it's a straightforward lie. It would mean that Israelis are anti-Semitic. What it does is it says that certain types of criticism of Israel are anti-Semitic, such as, and these are examples that Labour has deliberately left out of its own unique definition of anti-Semitism, such as one of the oldest anti-Semitic sort of themes in history, which is that Jews don't owe a loyalty to the country that they live in, but owe a loyalty to some kind of foreign power. Now, for the Nazis and for the Soviets, they used the phrase rootless cosmopolitan. In other words, that Jews were not really settled in their own country. They were really agents of other areas. In modern parlance, it's people who say that Jews, British Jews, such as me, are not actually really properly British. We really owe our allegiance to Israel above Britain. Now, that's a deeply racist and anti-Semitic canard. Now, the Labour Party has specifically left that out of its definition. There's another example, which is to say that Israel is a racist endeavour, and to compare it with the Nazis. Again, that's a very, to compare Israel with the Nazis is regarded by most Jews as being anti-Semitic. Now, under the Macpherson principle, which was, if you remember when Stephen Lawrence was killed, there was the Macpherson inquiry into the police, which found that it was, to use the phrase, institutionally racist. He set out a principle which was crudely that the victim of racism gets to say whether someone is being racist towards them. So, for instance, the black community can say, well, hold on a minute, this is racist if you use the N-word or something, which most people would accept is obviously racist. Or, if you call somebody from Pakistan, I won't use the word, but, if you use a rude abbreviation of that against them. But uniquely, what the Labour Party has said, because it's inconceivable that the Labour Party would have said, say, to Muslims, you're not allowed to define what Islamophobia is. But what they've said to the Jewish community is, you know what? You're not going to tell us what is anti-Semitic. We're going to tell you. Because 68 rabbis, unprecedentedly for this country, from all different strands of rabbinical opinion, who usually can't even agree on what the time of day is, they came together on Monday to sign a letter to the Labour Party to say, look, what you're doing is racist, what you're doing is anti-Semitic, you're enabling anti-Semitism. The chief rabbi, who is one of the most sort of taciturn, least in-your-face rabbis you could imagine, wrote to Jeremy Corbyn and the National Executive to say, if you go ahead with this, you will be showing, his exact words, unprecedented contempt for the Jewish community in this country. And what they did was they ignored him, and they did show that unprecedented contempt.
People will wonder, Stephen, and you said yourself that the bulk of the definition is there. And I've been looking at some of the reaction to this. And Adam Sutcliffe, who's a reader in European history at King's College London, wrote to The Guardian, among many things, he said, disagreement over the detailed glossing of an agreed definition of anti-Semitism is now preposterously conflated with anti-Semitism itself. What difference does it make when the bulk of the definition is there lose four examples?
Yeah. Well, the difference it makes is specifically that those definitions matter. Those definitions matter. Those are the one that I gave you, for instance, saying that Jews are actually really, or most British Jews or people in public life like me, we're actually really agents of Israel rather than Britain. That matters because that's said about me. It's said about other people by Labour Party members repeatedly. So it matters because what the Labour Party's done is it's said that you can't be anti-Semitic. That is not of itself anti-Semitic. Now, there's a second sort of string to this, which I might sort of just quickly go into, which is that they've also said that in order to be anti-Semitic, you have to show intent. You have to actually intend to be anti-Semitic. So, for instance, if we were to apply that to somebody walking down the street who sees somebody black and then shouts the N-word at them, under the Labour Party's definition, if you were to apply that to other forms of racism, that would only be racist if they meant to be racist. Well, most people would accept that if you use the N-word, you're being racist in any case, whatever your intention was. But there's something really sly going on with this in terms of the reason that it's specifically interesting with regard to anti-Semitism, because the Labour Party says they put at the top of their definition something that is incontrovertible, I would have thought, which is anti-Semitism is racism. They are the same thing. If you're anti-Semitic, you're racism. And you'd think, of course, that's a good thing that the Labour Party said that. However, the twisted logic that's behind this is that it will be almost impossible to find a racist. There are very few racists who say, you know what, yes, actually I am racist. Most people say, no, of course I'm not racist. I just think X, Y, and Z, which happen to be most people's view racist. So with regards to anti-Semitism, if you say, under the way the Labour Party's framed it, if you say, when I say, for instance, Jews owe their loyalty to a foreign power, I can't possibly be anti-Semitic. I'm an anti-racist. I've spent my entire life fighting racism. So how can I possibly be anti-Semitic? They then say, well, at the top it says anti-Semitism equals racism. They are the same thing. So if someone is an anti-racist, they can't be anti-Semitic under the Labour Party's definition. So they found another way as well to excuse and enable anti-Semitism amongst Labour Party members.
People throughout the Labour Party have acknowledged that this is an issue that they need to deal with. In terms of this new code, I'm just looking at what the hierarchy have said. Jenny Formby, who's the General Secretary, of course, she said it's the most thorough and expansive code of conduct on anti-Semitism introduced by any political party in the UK. John Landsman has called it the new gold standard. He said it's stronger than anything of its kind adopted by any political party in this country. Is that incorrect to say, or are they ahead of others in adopting this?
To use Christine Keeler's phrase, they wouldn't they? They're hardly likely to say, yeah, you know what, this is a code we brought in order to enable anti-Semitism. It's pretty useless, actually.
But on the facts, on the basis of the facts, would they have the strongest? No, there are others who are better at this.
Number one, because I've given you the examples of how it's much weaker, because they've specifically left out from there, they've left out the examples about, calling Israel a Nazi state that's built on racism. anti-Semitism. They've left out the example of saying that Jews in this country owe their allegiance primarily to Israel, and they've done so deliberately. And the point is, it's not, fine, you can take Jenny Formby and John Landsman and so on, but you can look across the world at the vast majority of foreign governments, of academics, of police, of prosecution services, all in this, of councils in this country which accept this definition as being the sensible definition. And uniquely, the Labour Party has decided that it should be able to decide what anti-Semitism is rather than Jews. Can you imagine if the Labour Party said to the Muslim community, you know what, we're not going to let you define what Islamophobia is. It's nothing to do with you. We'll decide it. But that's exactly what they said to the Labour Party, to the Jewish community. 68 rabbis wrote to the Labour Party on Monday to say that. The chief rabbi, who, as I say, is not, hardly shoots his mouth off about anything, the chief rabbi said that if they were to go ahead and adopt this definition, they would be showing unprecedented contempt for the Jewish community, and they've gone ahead and done it.
The big question, Stephen, is what should happen now, and this is something that you address on the front page of the Jewish Chronicle. Yeah. Do you think that MPs should be resigning from the party? Because the Parliamentary Labour Party did vote overwhelmingly for the full definition to be adopted, so they made their feelings clear. Yes. What should they do to protest against this?
My view and the view of the Jewish Chronicle is that there comes a point where you say enough is enough, that we can't get anywhere at all. As you said, the vast majority, I think there were only 4 MPs who objected, who supported the definition. All the other Labour MPs either abstained or voted against it. So I think there comes a point where you say, you know what, we are now part of a party which is institutionally anti-Semitic, and how can we campaign to put in number 10 a prime minister, a man who's been driving this? How can we do that? So certainly in my view, I think unless things change, and I can't see any evidence that things will change, there comes a point where they may end up having to resign the whip or make some kind of real protest. A lot of them say very fine things, and we're all hugely grateful for their support, and they put out strong tweets and so on attacking what's going on. But in the end, that doesn't change anything.
No, you want action. Have you spoken, Stephen, privately to any Labour MPs who've indicated to you that this is a step that they might take? Yes,
all I can say is that I've certainly spoken to Labour MPs who say there may come a point where it will happen. But I couldn't say that. No,
I wouldn't expect you to name names. Could you put a number on it, maybe?
No, I can't. I mean, I don't mean I won't. I mean, I'm unable to. I don't know the numbers. I've spoken to those that I'm relatively close to and so on. And yes, these are issues that people consider. That's not to say that that they're about to do it, but the judgment call is when does it become irreversible, as it were, that actually they're taking the whip from a party that they can no longer support in any way.
Stephen Pollard, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Well,